Hey, how's it going, everybody? Today, I'm going to be reviewing Thor: Love and Thunder. This is a movie I found underwhelming. I guess that's the one word I could really say about this movie, and that's actually a lot more positive than what I was originally thinking about this movie. The first 70 minutes of this movie, I actually think are pretty bad. It's to the point, I mean, that's the word I would have used. I originally would have used the word bad, but the last 35 to 40 minutes of this movie really saved the experience. Uh, and it sucks too because listen, I'm a big Taika Waititi fan. I like just about everything he's done. I like the movies that he's in as an actor as well. I was looking forward to this movie. I wasn't a fan of the first two Thor movies, but I do like Thor Ragnarok. And the trailers to this movie look really great. They look really electric. You saw that there's the Guardians of the Galaxy are going to be in the movie and stuff like that. This movie is a comedy, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, the comedy absolutely falls flat. I saw this at 4:30 p.m. an afternoon showing today, Thursday, and it was a packed house. It really was, and it wasn't just the humor didn't just fall flat for me. It fell flat for mostly everybody else in the theater as well. There were some instances that got some laughs, and I think I chuckled about three times. There was one of those three times I chuckled where I actually had a pretty big laugh come out. But when you have a movie that's a comedy and most of it falls flat and you really only get about three laughs out of it, yeah, I mean, listen, you know there's a problem. It pains me to say this about this movie because I was really looking forward to it and I do like most of the MCU movies, but this is just, I really have no other words other than to just say it was just an underwhelming movie. Now, it's kind of hard for me to really say exactly some of the reasons I found this underwhelming without giving away spoilers. So I'm going to try to tiptoe around certain things. Now, I already talked about the fact that the humor is not very good, and that's a big deal because this movie's supposed to be a comedy. Now, the other thing is not very good in this movie is the romance between Thor and Jane Foster is also not really good in this movie, and this movie is also a bit of a romance. It's basically a romantic comedy, and that's even what the way it's kind of being marketed during interviews and everything. That's even what Taika Waititi and everything has come out and said. It's a romantic comedy, and when you make a romantic comedy and the comedy falls flat and the romance isn't very good, you basically have a dud on your hands at that point. Now, I said the first 70 minutes is pretty bad. Basically, after the first 70 minutes, the movie stops trying to rely so much on comedy and it gets a little bit more action oriented. And I want to make this clear. The reason I didn't like the first 70 minutes of the movie has nothing to do with there being like a lack of action. There actually is a good amount of action in the movie itself, but a lot of the action is it involves so much comedy to the point where when the comedy falls flat, you're just kind of sitting there like, "Ugh, dude, it's almost kind of awkward in a way because you know a character will make a joke or you can tell that there's supposed to be some quip, some one liner that they think is going to really land with the audience, that there's this space in between when one character says something and another character says something, and when no one is laughing in the audience, it just it's like a very awkward moment. And the movie in a sense is actually kind of awkward as well. And to go along with that awkwardness is a feeling of whiplash because this movie, it has instances where it's trying to be serious and dramatic, and then all of a sudden it's like Thor is making a joke about somebody losing their arm, like in the moment where something's about to be dramatic. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm like, what is this movie trying to do? And I'm still talking about the first 70 minutes of the movie here because it was all over the place tonally. And then there were scenes in this movie that I feel like shouldn't have even been in here because it feels like, or if they were, they could have at least like limited them down, maybe cut them down a little bit because this movie is 2 hours exactly in running length, basically. And I mean, that includes the credits, obviously. I feel like they could have at least cut 15 to 20 minutes out of this movie, or maybe even a whole half an hour and made this movie exactly an hour and a half long. Because this movie's biggest issue is there are scenes that are taking place that you just don't care about. And then there's comedy that's being said back and forth between characters. It's not landing. And that's the issue. So I feel like in the editing room, unless they really thought that maybe in any test audiences they had or when they were editing the movie, unless they thought that the comedy was working, it doesn't make sense for this movie to be as long as it does because it's just a lot of comedic stuff that just doesn't land. So it just becomes very awkward. Let's talk about Christian Bale as Gore the God Butcher. He did a really good job in this movie. A few months ago, Taika Waititi came out and was talking about how this is probably going to be the best villain we've seen in the MCU. I understand why he said that because he's going to try to obviously drum up some buzz for his movie, but that's not anywhere close to accurate. Like, if we want to compare Gore to like someone like Thanos, for instance, like Thanos, as evil as he was, you you actually could sympathize with him in a way because of his backstory and everything. And in this movie, you get a little bit of Gore's backstory, but the thing is you don't really care enough to really sympathize with him, even though the movie kind of wants you to sympathize with him in a way. You just don't. And so some of his actions, in a way, you don't really feel like any of it's really necessary. I don't want to say that they're not justified, but you just don't care. So when you don't care about what a villain's doing, or if you can't sympathize with anything that a villain is doing, it's not really that great of a villain at the end of the day. And that's not a knock against Christian Bale. That has to do with the writing and the way the movie and everything is put together at the end of the day. So the last 40 minutes of this movie comes together because basically they cut the comedy. It turns a little bit more action. We get a little bit more time with Jane and Thor at that point. This movie it's very uneven, and that's why the first 70 minutes I really think is just bad, but the last 40 minutes makes it so it's the movie itself just becomes an underwhelming experience. I feel like it's kind of hard for me to pinpoint exactly the exact issues I have with this movie, like down to like a microscopic level without giving away spoilers. But the biggest issue at the end of the day is just the comedy fell flat. It was just very awkward at times. And another thing, like I said, I saw this in a packed theater. All right, 4:30 p.m. Thursday, and when the movie ended, the credits started rolling. There was no one that clapped, not a single person. And I bring that up because here in America, that's a big thing. People love to clap at the end of movies if you enjoy the movie. That is, especially at the end of Marvel movies, people are always clapping. And I said this in my Morbius review because nobody clapped at the end of Morbius either. The theater was dead silent, and you heard a few people kind of like talking about, oh, I don't know if I really like this, or they're a little iffy on it. And some people just were just like sitting there. I think, in my opinion, they were just dead silent because they were probably in a state of shock. Um, and it's interesting to me because I've heard some of the reviews about this movie, and I've seen some people basically say that they really like it. And the entire cinema I was in, everybody I think just had the exact same viewpoint I had, where this movie was just underwhelming. The comedy didn't hit, and the romance didn't hit. And at the end of the day, when you have a romantic comedy, you need the romance and the comedy to at least hit to deliver a satisfying experience. And I'm sorry to say it, just the movie wasn't satisfying, and that sucks because the trailers were so great. I like Taika Waititi. The movie looks beautiful. I'll say that. When it comes to a lot of MCU movies, a lot of MCU movies look very dull as far as colors and stuff go. This movie definitely pops off the screen. It looks great on the big screen as far as colors and everything go. There's some cool cinematic shots, but the movie as a whole, the first 70 minutes is just such a slog to get through that by the time anything really cool happens in the last 35 to 40 minutes of the movie, you almost instead of you feeling excited about it, it's more so you're just like, oh man, it's about time something happens, because you just sat there basically being bored for so long. So unfortunately, I honestly I can't recommend anybody see Thor: Love and Thunder because it's such an underwhelming experience. I just don't see the reason to see it in cinemas. I mean, everything comes out so fast these days. This is a movie I would just wait for it to hit Disney Plus. Personally, and I hate to say that, but listen, this movie was an absolute miss for me. It was an absolute miss for everybody in my theater as well. Anyway, if any of you guys have seen Thor: Love and Thunder, let me know what you thought about in the comment section down below. And like always, I hope to see you back in my next review.